Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. This whole mess started when I inherited my grandparents' property about 3 years ago. It's a beautiful 5-acre plot with a charming farmhouse that's been in our family since the 1940s. The house sits on a small hill surrounded by mature oak trees, with a good chunk of open land that slopes down toward what used to be farmland. About 2 years ago, a developer bought the adjacent property and built one of those cookie-cutter suburban developments. You know the type. Identical houses crammed together, each with a tiny yard and zero personality. They called it some generic name and immediately established an HOA with rules stricter than most military bases. I work remotely in tech consulting, so the quiet location was perfect for me. I had big plans for the back portion of my property, a large organic garden and maybe a greenhouse where I could grow my own vegetables. The area I had in mind was this perfect flat section separated from the main house by a small patch of woods and a gentle hill. It backed right up to what the development designated as their common area. From day one, the HOA made it clear they weren't thrilled about having a non-member neighbor. I started getting violation notices almost immediately. Apparently my rustic wooden mailbox was non-compliant with community standards. My sunflowers were exceeding approved height limits. The fact that I wasn't even part of their HOA didn't seem to matter to them. The HOA president was this woman who perfectly embodied every negative stereotype about power-hungry board members. She was in her early 50s, always impeccably dressed, and had this condescending way of speaking that made you feel like you were being scolded by a substitute teacher. She'd drive by my property in her pristine SUV, taking photos of anything she deemed objectionable. I generally ignored their complaints since they had zero authority over my property. I figured eventually they'd get bored and focus on harassing their actual members. Boy, was I wrong about that. The real trouble started when I had to leave town for 2 months to care for my uncle who'd had a stroke. It was a difficult time, and honestly, the last thing on my mind was what might be happening back home. I arranged for a neighbor to check on the house occasionally and keep an eye on things, but the property's fairly secluded and you can't see the back section from the road. When I finally returned home in early summer, I was exhausted and looking forward to some peace and quiet. I'd been planning to start work on that garden area as soon as I got settled back in. But as I was unloading my car, I heard something strange coming from the back of my property. It sounded like splashing, music, and people laughing and talking. At first I thought maybe some kids had found their way onto my land for a swim in the creek, though that seemed unlikely since there's no real swimming spot back there. Curious and a bit concerned, I decided to walk back and investigate. I followed the old path through the woods and over the small hill toward the flat area where I'd planned my garden. As I crested the hill and the trees cleared, I stopped dead in my tracks. I literally could not believe what I was seeing. Where my future garden was supposed to be, there was a brand new in-ground swimming pool. Not just any pool, this was a full setup with a concrete deck, professional landscaping, lounge chairs, umbrellas, and even a decorative fence around the perimeter. A large professional sign read, "Welcome to Community Pool, Residents Only." There were at least a dozen people using the pool. Families with kids, teenagers playing volleyball, adults lounging with drinks. They were acting like they'd been coming here all summer, completely at home on what was definitely my private property. I stood there for probably a full minute trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't some mistake or misunderstanding. Someone had spent serious money to build this pool, and they'd built it squarely on my land. I walked down toward the pool area, still in shock. A woman in a designer's swimsuit looked up at me with annoyance and said I needed to show my resident ID to use the community pool. When I explained that this was actually my private property, she laughed and told me I was confused. She pointed to the sign and suggested I take any concerns to the HOA president. Several other people joined in, treating me like some kind of troublemaker who was trying to crash their private party. One guy actually told me I needed to leave before they called security. The audacity was unbelievable. I asked where I could find the HOA president, and they pointed toward a woman holding court in a cluster of lounge chairs. I recognized her immediately. It was the same person who'd been sending me violation notices for the past 2 years. I approached her and introduced myself, explaining that she was currently relaxing on my private property. Her reaction was everything I should have expected. She didn't even look up from her magazine at first, just waved her hand dismissively and told me I was mistaken. When I pressed the issue, she finally looked at me with this smug expression and explained that there had been a land survey error when the development was built. According to her, this land had been abandoned and unused, so the HOA had every right to improve it for the benefit of the community. I told her I had documentation proving ownership and that they needed to remove the pool immediately. That's when she really showed her true colors. She stood up and looked me up and down like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. Then she said something I'll never forget as long as I live. She told me that frankly they'd done me a huge favor by building this beautiful amenity that had significantly increased my property value. I should be thanking them, not complaining. Then came the real kicker. She reached into her pool bag and pulled out what looked like an invoice. It was a bill for $5,000 labeled as a neighborhood improvement special assessment for my share of the pool construction costs. I stared at this piece of paper in absolute disbelief. Not only had they built a pool on my land without permission, they wanted me to pay for the privilege. The woman actually had the nerve to tap her watch and tell me the payment was due within 30 days or they'd have to assess late fees. I told her in very clear terms that I would not be paying anything, that this pool was built illegally on my property, and that I wanted it removed immediately. Her response was to laugh and say that I could take it up with their lawyer if I had a problem. The next day, I drove to my lawyer's office with copies of my property deed and the most recent survey I'd had done when I inherited the land. My lawyer took one look at the documentation and confirmed what I already knew. The pool was definitely built on my property, about 30 feet inside my property line. He sent a formal letter to the HOA demanding immediate removal of all structures and cessation of use of my land. Their response came back within a week from their own lawyer. They claimed their survey showed the land belonged to the development and that my documents were outdated and potentially fraudulent. They went on to threaten me with a lawsuit for harassment and claimed they would pursue adverse possession of the land since they'd been improving and maintaining it. The letter encouraged all residents to use the pool as much as possible to strengthen their legal claim. What followed was months of escalating harassment. The HOA filed complaints with the county claiming I had dangerous dead trees that might fall on their property. They reported my uncontrolled vegetation as a fire hazard. They even tried to claim my gravel driveway was creating dust pollution. Every few weeks I'd get visits from various county inspectors who would look around, find nothing wrong, and apologize for having to waste their time on obviously frivolous complaints. The final straw came when their lawyer sent what they called a final settlement offer. They were willing to purchase the land where the pool sat for $2,000, which was less than 5% of what that parcel was actually worth. The letter stated that if I refused their generous offer, they would proceed with an expensive lawsuit to claim the land and would countersue me for the full cost of pool construction plus damages. That's when I realized I'd been approaching this whole thing wrong. I'd been trying to get them to remove their pool from my land, but legally speaking, they'd built it on my property, which meant legally it was my pool. I called my lawyer and explained my new thinking. After he stopped laughing, he agreed it was a brilliant approach. We crafted a response that was beautifully simple and direct. My lawyer sent a letter thanking the HOA for their generous gift, and informing them that since the pool was built on my property, I was now claiming ownership of it. All HOA members and their guests needed to vacate my private land immediately. The HOA president called me within hours, absolutely furious. She screamed about how they'd spent $80,000 on that pool and I couldn't just steal it. I calmly explained that I wasn't stealing anything. They'd built it on my land, which made it mine. If they wanted to dispute that, they were welcome to take it up in court. The next morning, I called the sheriff's department and reported trespassing. When the deputies arrived, I showed them my property documentation and explained the situation. They had no choice but to inform everyone at the pool that they were on private property and needed to leave. The chaos that followed was beautiful. Families gathering up their pool toys in confusion, teenagers complaining about their summer being ruined, adults demanding to know how this could happen. The HOA president stood there red-faced, trying to argue with the deputies, but the law was crystal clear. That's when I really got creative with my malicious compliance. First, I hired a fencing company to remove the decorative fence around the pool and replace it with a 10-foot chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. The gate was secured with an industrial padlock. Then I had new signs made. Professional, weather-resistant signs that read, "Private property, no trespassing," in large red letters. Right next to those, I hung a beautiful custom sign that read, "The Neighborhood Improvement Memorial Pool, a monument to arrogance and poor planning. $, 2024. But I wasn't done yet. I formed a single-member LLC and got all the necessary permits to operate a private swimming club. I had a website built and created social media pages for the Memorial Pool Club, an exclusive, high-end private facility. Membership was priced at $8,000 for the summer season. I offered a special neighbor discount of exactly 1% off for residents of the adjacent development. The marketing copy was fantastic. I thanked the local HOA for their generous, if misguided, initial investment in this exclusive facility. The website featured professional photos of the pool with testimonials from satisfied members, my lawyer, and a few friends who thought the whole situation was hilarious. I even had business cards printed and started advertising in the local paper. The reaction was everything I'd hoped for, and more. The HOA president was livid, calling me multiple times a day demanding I stop this nonsense. Residents were furious that they'd paid for a pool they couldn't use and were now being mocked by my marketing campaign. The story caught the attention of local news, who ran a piece about the pool war between the homeowner and the HOA. The reporter interviewed residents who expressed outrage at their board's incompetence, and the HOA president, who insisted they were the victims of a vindictive neighbor. The HOA hired a new lawyer and attempted to sue me for theft, fraud, and emotional distress. The case lasted exactly one court session. The judge reviewed the property documents, the timeline of events, and the HOA owned correspondence claiming they'd improved my land. His ruling was swift and decisive. The pool was legally my property since it was built on my land. The HOA claims were frivolous and showed a pattern of harassment. He ordered them to pay all my legal fees, which by that point had reached nearly $15,000. The financial impact on the HOA was devastating. Between the cost of building the pool, their own legal fees, and now my legal fees, they were facing a bill of over $100,000. The board tried to assess each homeowner to cover the costs, but the residents revolted. Within 2 months, every single board member had been voted out of office. The HOA president was forced to resign in disgrace and actually moved out of the development entirely. Several residents even talked about suing the former board members personally for their negligent handling of the situation. I spent most of that summer operating my exclusive club. I actually did have a few legitimate members, people who heard about the story and thought it was hilarious enough to pay for pool access. Mostly, though, it was just me and some friends enjoying the fruits of the HOA labor. As fall approached, I decided it was time for the final phase of my plan. I hired a demolition crew and had the entire pool filled in and removed. The concrete was broken up and hauled away, and I brought in premium soil and compost to restore the area. Over the winter, I planned out my original vision for the space. Come spring, I planted the large organic garden I'd always wanted, complete with raised beds, fruit trees, and a beautiful greenhouse. The space was transformed into something genuinely productive and beautiful. The final touch was a small plaque I had made and placed near the greenhouse. It read, "In memory of poor decision-making, may future generations learn from the mistakes of the past." Just before the anniversary of this whole mess, I sent a thank you card to the former HOA president's forwarding address. Inside was a photo of my thriving garden where the pool used to be. I wrote a simple note thanking her and the former board for their investment in my property and noting how their contribution had truly blossomed into something wonderful. Looking back now, the whole experience taught me a lot about standing up for yourself and the power of creative problem solving. The former HOA spent $80,000 to build me a pool, provided months of entertainment, and ultimately funded the legal victory that paid for my dream garden. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad, it's getting creative and letting entitled people destroy themselves with their own arrogance. I'm sitting in my garden as I write this, surrounded by tomatoes and peppers that grew from soil that used to be the bottom of someone else's pool. Life has a funny way of working out sometimes. The new HOA board actually sent me a formal apology and a fruit basket when they took office. We've had no problems since then, and they've been very careful to respect property boundaries. Funny how quickly attitudes change when people face real consequences for their actions. I still get comments from neighbors about how beautiful my garden looks, and I always smile and tell them about the generous donation that made it possible. Most of them know the story by now and appreciate the irony. The whole thing became something of a local legend. I still occasionally get calls from people dealing with their own HOA problems asking for advice. My answer is always the same. Know your rights, document everything, and never underestimate the power of creative compliance. Would I do anything differently if I could go back? Honestly, probably not. Justice was served, I got my dream garden, and everyone learned a valuable lesson about respecting other people's property. Plus, I have a story that never fails to entertain at dinner parties. The moral of the story is simple. If you're going to act like you own something that isn't yours, you better be prepared for the actual owner to take you up on that claim. And if you're going to pick a fight with someone who works in problem solving for a living, you better make sure you have your facts straight first. These days, I spend my evenings in the garden, watching the sunset and listening to the peaceful sounds of nature. No splashing, no pool parties, no entitled people demanding things they have no right to. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, if you're patient and clever enough, the good guys really do win in the end. Update. 6 months later, the saga continues. Well, this story has had quite the life of its own since I first posted it. A lot of people asked for updates, and honestly, there have been some pretty interesting developments that I thought you'd all enjoy hearing about. First off, my post went way more viral than I expected. It got picked up by several YouTubers who read Reddit stories shared on Facebook groups and even made it into a few local newspaper articles. The whole thing became a bit of a cautionary tale about HOA overreach, which was honestly pretty satisfying. But the real update is what happened to the people involved and some unexpected consequences I never saw coming. The former HOA president's revenge attempt. Remember the former HOA president who moved away in disgrace? Well, apparently she wasn't quite done with me. About 3 months after my original post, I got a call from my lawyer. She had hired an attorney and was threatening to sue me personally for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress over the story going viral. Her claim was that my social media posts and the news coverage had damaged her reputation and made it impossible for her to find work. She was demanding $50,000 in damages and wanted me to publicly retract my story and apologize. My lawyer's response was basically to laugh and tell her attorney that truth is an absolute defense against defamation. Everything I'd posted was documented fact, and emotional distress from facing consequences for your own actions isn't legally actionable. Her lawyer quietly dropped the threat after my attorney offered to countersue for harassment. The development's transformation. The new HOA board that took over after the previous one was voted out has been night and day different. They reached out to me about 6 months ago asking if I'd be willing to meet with them to discuss being a good neighbor. Turns out, the whole pool fiasco had been such a financial and PR disaster that it completely changed how the development operates. They dissolved most of the restrictive rules, fired the management company that had been encouraging aggressive enforcement, and now focus primarily on basic maintenance and snow removal. The best part is they actually asked my advice on revising their bylaws to prevent future board overreach. I spent an afternoon with their new president and attorney helping them draft language that requires board approval for any expenditure over $1,000 and mandates professional surveys before any construction projects. They've become the most reasonable HOA I've ever heard of, which is saying something. Property values in their development have actually gone up since they relaxed the restrictions, and resident satisfaction is through the roof. The unexpected visitors. This is probably the most surprising development. My story apparently resonated with a lot of people dealing with similar HOA issues, and I've had several visitors over the past few months. People have literally driven hours to see the famous garden that used to be a pool and ask for advice on their own situations. I've helped 3 different homeowners successfully fight their HOA over various overreach issues. One case involved an HOA trying to force a veteran to remove a flagpole. Another was about someone being fined for having a vegetable garden instead of grass. And the third was an HOA demanding someone remove solar panels that were aesthetically displeasing. In all 3 cases, we used similar tactics. Thorough documentation, understanding the legal framework, and creative compliance with their own rules. All 3 homeowners won their battles, and 2 of those HOA ended up reforming their practices just like mine did. The garden's success. My organic garden has exceeded every expectation I had. This summer's harvest was incredible. I grew enough vegetables to supply my own needs, plus have plenty to share with neighbors and donate to the local food bank. The greenhouse allowed me to extend the growing season well into winter. The irony isn't lost on me that the soil where that pool used to be is now the most productive part of my garden. Something about the ground being excavated and refilled with premium soil created perfect growing conditions. My tomatoes in that section were massive. I've started offering weekend workshops on organic gardening, and they've become surprisingly popular. People come from all over the county to learn about sustainable growing practices. It's turned into a small side business that's both profitable and personally fulfilling. Media attention and its consequences. The story caught the attention of a few property rights organizations who asked me to speak at conferences about HOA reform. I've done 3 speaking engagements so far, and it's been fascinating to meet other people who've had similar experiences with overreaching community associations. One of the conferences led to me consulting with a state legislator who's drafting a bill to reform HOA laws. The proposed legislation would require professional surveys before any construction on disputed land and create stronger penalties for boards that exceed their authority. The bill has a real chance of passing, which means this whole crazy experience might actually lead to legal protections for other homeowners. That feels like a pretty meaningful outcome from what started as a personal property dispute. The former board member's fate. Through the neighborhood grapevine, I've learned what happened to the other former board members. Two of them moved away entirely, selling their homes at a loss because they couldn't handle the social ostracism from their neighbors. One guy apparently got divorced, with his wife citing his obsession with controlling the neighbors as a contributing factor. The former treasurer actually approached me at the grocery store a few months ago to apologize. She explained that she'd gotten swept up in the board president's aggressive approach and regretted not speaking up when things started getting out of hand. She seemed genuinely remorseful and said the whole experience taught her to never go along with something she knew was wrong just to avoid conflict. The property value surprise. Here's something I never expected. My property value has actually increased significantly because of all this. Apparently, having a well-documented history of successfully defending property rights makes a piece of land more attractive to potential buyers. My realtor friend ran some comparables and said my property is now worth about 15% more than similar parcels in the area. The garden and greenhouse have also added substantial value. What started as an act of defiance against an entitled HOA has turned into one of the best investments I've ever made. Legal precedent. My case has actually been cited in several other property disputes across the state. My lawyer tells me it's become something of a textbook example of how property law works when dealing with unauthorized improvements. Law students at the state university are apparently studying it as part of their property law curriculum. It's surreal to think that my pool war has become an educational tool for future lawyers. I like to imagine some law student somewhere reading about this case and learning that sometimes the best legal strategy is to let your opponents defeat themselves with their own arrogance. Community impact. The story has had ripple effects throughout our county. Several other HOA have proactively revised their bylaws and procedures to avoid similar disasters. Property rights have become a bigger topic of discussion in local politics, and candidates for county commissioner are actually being asked about their positions on HOA reform. I've been contacted by homeowners in at least a dozen other developments who used my story as leverage to negotiate with their own boards. Just having a documented case of HOA overreach leading to financial disaster has apparently been enough to make many boards think twice about pushing too hard. Personal reflections. Looking back on this whole experience, I'm amazed at how much my life has changed. What started as a simple desire to have a quiet place to grow vegetables has turned into advocacy work, consulting, speaking engagements, and a small business. I never saw any of that coming. The garden has become a gathering place for the community in ways I never anticipated. The workshops bring people together, neighbors stop by to chat and see what's growing, and kids from the development next door often peek over the fence to watch me work. It's created connections I never would have had otherwise. Most importantly, I've learned that standing up for your principles can have consequences far beyond what you initially imagine. My decision to fight back against an entitled HOA didn't just protect my property. It helped protect other people's rights and may lead to lasting legal changes. The final word. People often ask me if I would have handled anything differently knowing what I know now. The answer is still no. Every step of this process felt right at the time, and the long-term outcomes have been better than I ever could have hoped. The former HOA president's attempt to sue me actually validated that I'd done everything correctly. The fact that she couldn't find any legal grounds to challenge my actions, even with the benefit of hindsight and a team of lawyers, confirms that truth and documentation really are the best defenses. I'm writing this update from my greenhouse on a snowy December evening, surrounded by winter vegetables and planning next year's garden. The peace and productivity of this space stands in stark contrast to the chaos and conflict that used to exist here. It's a daily reminder that sometimes the best revenge really is living well. The memorial plaque I installed has become something of a local landmark. People take pictures with it and share them on social media with captions about standing up to bullies and protecting property rights. It's become a symbol of something much bigger than my personal victory. As I finish this update, I can see lights twinkling in the houses of the development next door. The new HOA has organized a holiday party for residents, and from what I hear, it's a genuine celebration of community rather than an exercise in social control. Change is possible even in the most unlikely places. To anyone dealing with their own HOA nightmare, my advice remains the same. Know your rights, document everything, and never underestimate the power of creative compliance. But more than that, remember that your fight might be about more than just your own property. Sometimes standing up to bullies helps everyone in ways you'll never fully know. And if you're ever in my area and want to see the garden that used to be a pool, you're welcome to stop by. I'll show you around and tell you the whole story in person. Just don't expect me to let you swim in my vegetables. Final update, 2 years later, the complete conclusion. I honestly didn't think I'd be writing another update, but so many people have asked for a final wrap-up that I figured I owed it to everyone who followed this story to give you the complete ending. The legislative victory, remember that bill I mentioned helping draft about HOA reform? It passed! The legislation now requires professional boundary surveys for any construction project within 50 feet of property lines, mandates insurance coverage for HOA boards, and creates personal liability for board members who knowingly exceed their authority. The bill was nicknamed the Pool Law in the state legislature, and I was actually invited to the signing ceremony. The governor mentioned my case specifically in his remarks about protecting property rights. It was surreal watching my little pool war become actual state law. The best part is that 3 other states have now passed similar legislation, using our law as a template. My lawyer estimates that these new laws will protect thousands of homeowners from similar HOA overreach. What started as one crazy neighbor dispute has literally changed the legal landscape. The documentary. This is probably the wildest development. A documentary filmmaker reached out last year wanting to tell the story. The film is called Fenced In: America's HOA Problem, and my case is featured as the central story, with several other similar situations from around the country. The documentary premiered at a film festival and has been picked up by a streaming service. I got to attend the premiere, which was both exciting and weird. Seeing actors reenact my confrontations with the former HOA president was definitely surreal. The filmmaker interviewed the former HOA president for the documentary. She's apparently working as a real estate agent in another state now and still insists she did nothing wrong. She claimed I ambushed her with legal technicalities and that reasonable people would have just paid the assessment. Some people never learn. The garden's evolution. My little garden has grown into something I never could have imagined. I now have a waiting list for my weekend workshops, and I've started offering online courses in organic gardening. The greenhouse has been expanded twice, and I've added a small farm stand that operates on the honor system. The memorial plaque has become a legitimate tourist attraction. The county tourism board actually includes it on their quirky local landmarks map. People come from all over to take pictures and hear the story. I've had visitors from as far away as Europe who heard about the case and wanted to see where it all happened. I've also started a scholarship fund for law students studying property rights. It's funded partly by the profits from my gardening workshops, and partly by donations from people who were inspired by the story. We've given out 12 scholarships so far to students who want to help homeowners fight HOA abuse. The neighborhood today. The development next door is barely recognizable from what it was during the pool war. The new HOA board has maintained their reasonable approach, and the community has become genuinely pleasant. Property values have increased significantly, and resident satisfaction is consistently high. They actually asked me to serve as an outside advisor to help them review proposed rule changes. It's ironic that the same HOA that once tried to steal my land now seeks my input on governance issues. I help them about once a quarter, making sure they don't drift back toward the authoritarian approach that caused so much trouble. The former pool area has become my showcase garden. This summer I hosted the County Master Gardener Tour, and over 300 people came through to see the space. The soil where the pool used to be still produces the best vegetables on my property. There's something poetic about growing food where there used to be a monument to entitlement. Personal growth. This whole experience changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I've become much more involved in local politics and community issues. I'm currently serving on the County Planning Commission, where I can help make sure future developments don't create the same problems. I've also started a blog about property rights and sustainable living that has gained a surprising following. Writing about the intersection of legal issues and environmental concerns has become a passion I never knew I had. The blog generates enough income that I've been able to reduce my consulting work and focus more on advocacy. The speaking engagements have led to some amazing opportunities. I've testified before state legislative committees in 4 different states about HOA reform. I've spoken at law schools, property rights conferences, and even a United Nations panel on housing rights. It's been an incredible journey from someone who just wanted to grow tomatoes. The ripple effects continue. My case is now taught in law schools across the country as an example of property law principles. I regularly get emails from law students and their professors asking for additional details or clarification about specific aspects of the case. More importantly, I hear from homeowners every week who have successfully used strategies inspired by my story to fight their own HOA battles. A homeowner in Texas used my accept the gift approach when his HOA built a fence on his property. A woman in Florida cited my case when her HOA tried to force her to remove a memorial garden for her deceased husband. The most satisfying message I received was from a veteran who was being forced to remove a flagpole. He sent me a photo of his flag flying proudly after his HOA backed down when he threatened to use my case as precedent. Knowing that my stubborn streak helped protect someone's right to display the American flag makes all the hassle worthwhile. Financial impact. I should mention that this whole experience has been incredibly financially beneficial, though that was never the goal. Between the settlement money, increased property value, gardening business income, speaking fees, and documentary payments, I've probably made more money from this than I would have in 5 years of regular consulting work. I've used much of it to expand the property and create educational resources. I bought an adjacent 2-acre parcel that came up for sale and turned it into a demonstration farm for sustainable agriculture techniques. The whole operation now employs 3 part-time workers and hosts educational programs for local schools. The former pool area has a permanent educational display showing the timeline of events and explaining property rights. It's become a teaching tool that helps people understand how to protect their own rights while respecting others' property. The former players, I mentioned in my last update what happened to most of the former board members, but there have been some interesting developments. The former treasurer who apologized to me actually became a property rights advocate herself. She's now on the board of a homeowner rights organization and frequently speaks about the importance of ethical leadership in community associations. 2 of the former board members have reached out over the years to apologize and thank me for exposing the problems before they got even worse. Apparently, there were other schemes in the works that would have created even bigger financial disasters for the community. The former HOA president, on the other hand, has apparently learned nothing. According to the documentary filmmaker, she still believes she was right and that I was just a difficult neighbor who got lucky with legal technicalities. She's been involved in disputes with neighbors at her new location, though apparently nothing on the scale of our pool war. Lessons learned. If I could summarize what I've learned from this experience, it would be this. Principles matter, documentation is everything, and creative thinking can turn a disadvantage into an advantage. But more than that, individual actions can have consequences far beyond what you imagine. I thought I was just protecting my property from an entitled neighbor. I had no idea I was starting a chain of events that would lead to legislative changes, a documentary, and a small movement for property rights reform. Sometimes the right action at the right time can change everything. The key insights I share with people facing similar situations are: 1. Know your rights and document everything meticulously. 2. Don't get emotional. Stay focused on facts and law. 3. Sometimes the best defense is a creative offense. 4. Your individual fight might help many other people. 5. Patience and persistence usually win over anger and aggression. Looking forward. I'm writing this final update from the same greenhouse where I wrote the previous ones, but everything has changed. What used to be a quiet retirement project has become a mission to help other people protect their rights and build stronger communities. I'm currently working on a book about property rights and community governance that should be published next year. The working title is The Pool Wars: How One Garden Grew into a Movement. It will include practical advice for homeowners, case studies from around the country, and a blueprint for HOA reform. I'm also partnering with a legal aid organization to provide free consultations for homeowners facing HOA abuse. We're creating a network of volunteer attorneys who can help people who can't afford to fight back on their own. The goal is to make sure that property rights aren't just for people with enough money to hire lawyers. The Memorial. The memorial plaque has been joined by a larger installation that tells the complete story of the property's transformation. It includes before and after photos, a timeline of events, and information about the legal and legislative changes that resulted. The County Historical Society has designated it as an official landmark, but the real memorial is the garden itself. Every season brings new growth, new visitors, and new opportunities to share the message that individual action can create lasting change. The vegetables that grow in the soil where a stolen pool once sat are a daily reminder that something beautiful can emerge from conflict if you handle it the right way. Final thoughts. People sometimes ask if I miss the excitement of the pool war period. The answer is absolutely not. I much prefer the quiet satisfaction of watching my garden grow and knowing that my small contribution has made life better for other homeowners facing similar challenges. The pool war taught me that you don't have to be the loudest person in the room to win. You just have to be right, be persistent, and be creative. Sometimes the best victory is turning your opponent's weapons into your tools. As I finish this final update, I can see families walking through the development next door, enjoying a community that has learned to balance individual rights with collective needs. Children are playing in yards where they don't have to worry about violating arbitrary rules, and neighbors are talking to each other instead of filing complaints. That transformation from a place of conflict to a place of community might be the most satisfying outcome of all. The pool war is over, the garden has won, and life is good. To everyone who followed this story and cheered me on, thank you. To everyone dealing with their own property rights battle, stay strong and know that you're not alone. And to any HOA board members reading this, remember that the power you have is a trust, not a weapon. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have tomatoes to harvest and a community to serve. The pool war may be over, but the garden grows on. Anyway, thank